Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Space Snacks. I am thrilled this Monday because it's one of my favorite people in the world that I get to talk to, and that is Mike Mongo. Mike is he's just amazing. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great.
It's
I'm
so good
so
to
happy to be here, Sion.
Mike, you're one of my favorite people. I want to tell people, first of all, how we met. We met about 7 years ago, and this is a show about food and space and people who love space. But me and Mike met over your favorite drink. And can you share with us what that is?
Can I tell you that I haven't had my favorite drink yet this morning?
Oh no!
You
Are
know,
you
isn't
going to be
it
able to
funny?
function?
We're as grown-ups, we get up so early and we just and we get busy and and we're like, oh yeah, that thing that I do, the coffee that I drink.
Right, coffee. And I remember
Coffee.
distinctly when I first met you, you know, I loved the fact because I was like, who's this guy with I said him in like this? Who is this guy
You
with his
look
glasses
terrific.
upside down? And I was like, okay, but he's interesting. I gotta go talk to him. I gotta find out more. And I remember you saying, is there a place to go get coffee? We got to go get coffee. And so we went and we walked to get coffee. And we have been really good friends ever since.
Ever since.
Yeah. So how I want to get
And
the
then the
audience.
second time we met, we met over dinner. We at the same place, and we had dinner, and we had another one of our favorite foods, pizza.
Oh, that's right. The pizza. Oh, that was so good.
Yeah.
Every time we get together, we always have an adventure because I love the fact Key West and donuts.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
The best donuts.
The
At Glazed
best.
Donuts.
Yes.
Glazed Donuts in Key West.
And then we went to the national park, Dry Tortugas, and we went snorkeling together.
With big fish.
Oh, it's just so many fun adventures. But I want to get back to space and why space and what does that mean to you? So why space, Mike?
I mean, for me, space has since as early as I can remember. The only thing I remember loving before space was superheroes.
Oh,
Like my very first memory is Batman, and my very second memory is space.
wow.
As far as things that I have a passion for.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and once I realized, I was very young, I was maybe 4 when I realized that Batman really wasn't a job category. I kind of got, they were giving me that cue, and so then I at that time, that's right when I'm 55, so that was the year that Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins went to the moon, and so I was always paying attention to grown-ups. I don't know that they realized how much attention I was paying to them.
That's really interesting. I think that that's the case a lot of times with kids.
Mm.
That as an adult, I don't think I realize how much their attention they're paying to, the things that I do. And so getting into that, I know that you do a lot of amazing outreach with kids. The first thing that I want to talk about is how did you loved space as a young person, but
Yep.
was that the career trajectory that you went into?
Right. Oh, okay. So now you and I both we've talked about these things before,
Yes.
and I'm always struck by the fact that your career trajectory, the path that you went on, wasn't specifically space directed, and yet it kept on moving that way inevitably.
Right. Is that the same for you?
I don't know that that's the case. Like since I started working on computers when I was 14. And that was 1979, and they were brand new, and I just happened to be at a school built next to a Honeywell plant. which is a big operation that does engineering for a lot of military operations and spacecraft. And they connected our high school, which was relatively new, to something called a computer network. And I was offered the opportunity to take either typing, which when I was growing up was a big deal because we didn't use computers, we used typewriters, which are machines that we type paper on. I mean, like, this is all just, and out of 200 students, there were 4 of us that chose computers, and I was one of them. And one of them is another one who was in that same class with me, Warren Bear, and he's a billionaire now.
Wow. You know, I've mentioned this before. I'm 5 years younger than you, so I just turned 50. But you remind me of my older brother, who I love dearly. His name is Langley, and he's the same. I remember as a kid, my dad was into computers, having worked for NASA and trajectories and stuff like that, and came home with punch cards. But my brother Langley, in high school at a young age, as a teenager, was very influenced by that, and following that, the future of computers, and recognizing that early. So how has that led to space?
At the same time, now this is an interesting thing. At the same time, I had this amazing art teacher named Franny Lloyd in high school. And she said she was one of those people that wouldn't let you off the hook in a way, not in a way that was too jerky, but in a way that, like, we would, as high school students, we was like, I'm bored. This is boring. And she would stop us in our tracks. She was youngish. She was around your age, and she said, there is no boring. There's only boring people. And that landed, like, I was like, is she saying that I'm boring? Like, I am not boring. Like, I know that. I am very aware that I'm not boring. So I'm making a shift right here. Mm-hmm. And I'm readjusting my focus. I began to concentrate and pay attention to art in a different way that I'd ever. So I had a background in art and science happening simultaneously, parallel paths. And I continued with both of them. I kept on with computers, which has paid and paved my way. And I kept on with art, which has paid and paved my way.
Wow, that's so fantastic.
And I went to school for 13 years. I never got a degree. I just kept on going to college. And I wrapped up had an experience at UC California, Berkeley, and it kind of everything came to a conclusion right there. I was having a lot of success in my life. I was doing businesses, creating businesses and creating big art projects. And then I got a job as a marine science researcher. I went into the Army. I left the Army. I got a job as a marine science researcher back in the Florida Keys, where I'm from originally. And I was having the best time. I was 42. And I was thinking, it's funny because when you're a grown up, as you know, we always think about what we're going to do next. Mm-hmm. We don't think about, like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be this job and I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. As soon as we become grown-ups, we realize, oh, we don't really do the same thing for our whole life. We try new things and we go on to a new job, which makes sense because it would probably be pretty boring if you did the same thing your whole life. Mm-hmm. And unless you really, really, really love it. and that's cool because we know some people that are like that too. Mm-hmm. And so I was 42, I'm 55. So this is almost 15 years ago when I was thinking, okay, what's the thing that I want to do next? And I was in a laboratory and I was like, okay, so I was going up the list, like, okay, I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. And the last thing on my list, oh my gosh, it was astronaut.
Oh, I love that.
But I was 42.
Yeah.
And so there's a thing about being 42. If you're 42 and you're not an astronaut, guess what?
I understand.
And so I want you to know, because that was a thing I wanted to do more than anything my whole life. And I had always had it in the back of my head, like that was the thing I was going to do. I was standing up when it clicked in my head that the last thing on my list was astronaut. that the only thing I had left undone was astronaut, and that I was 42 and I was probably not going to get to be an astronaut, my knees actually gave out.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I fell against the wall. I was like, I couldn't believe, because you can't, like, you and I both, it's funny, I always share this stuff with students, how it is with grownups, how much time there is in 42 years. There's so much, like, I know your story, your trajectory. You've accomplished so much in such a period of time that we know that looking forward, there must be so much more ahead of us.
You're right.
And so I was thinking, oh my gosh, I have another 42, arguably, years, if I'm lucky. And there's only one thing left that I want to do, and I can't do it. So what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I was working with a charter company called Danger Charters. You and I have been on Danger. We did that in Key West.
Yes.
So they do a lot of citizen science and with the ecosystem. And I had the opportunity, I got to train all the staff, all the crew, and all the captains on science and the processes that we would experience and interact with. And I would get to be on the boat and on the boats. And I would go out on the boats, and every so often there would be students, not always, but often there would be students. And they saw my passion for science. and sometimes, every so often, one of those students would be so sprung on what we were talking about, and that could be zooxanthellae algae or Cassiopeia jellyfish or all the different kinds of sharks, the ampules of Lorenzi that are at the tip of a shark's nose that allows it to sense microcurrents. That's how it tells that life is around. And all of these things. And so every so often there would be a student that would be so taken by what we were discussing that they would literally transform in front of all of us.
Yeah.
That they would decide right then and there that this thing is what I'm going to work on for the rest of my life.
You know, and it's such a magical moment. And is that when you decided that you were going to become an astronaut teacher?
So then, like, I was in the office, I was at the lab, and I was thinking about what am I going to do if I'm not going to be an astronaut. And I had this experience that I was having with students that I was just like, what is this thing where students transform when they hear science? Some students, what is that? Now, here 15 years later, I know that that's teaching. I know that that's learning. Like, there's that relationship, because there's a funny thing. When you teach, you learn. And when you learn, you're teaching.
Yes.
And so when that connection is made, that was that moment that I was experiencing. I didn't know what it was at the time, because I wasn't a teacher at the time. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm going to match this experience with astronaut, and I'm going to put it together. And I called it Astronaut Teacher. I am going to be an astronaut teacher. I decided that in 2007, and I wrote the Astronaut Instruction Manual. I sat down after work, after coming back from the boats. I would go into the office. I would sit in front of a computer. I would type it out. I would put it into a word processor. I got all the information, and I started talking with every student that I could about space. And I very soon got invited to speak in classrooms, and then auditoriums, and then conferences, and then DARPA invited me to a conference in 2011. That's the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, which is one of the U.S.'s big think tanks that has people like you and I come up with ideas that lead to the breakthroughs in the future. And after I got invited to that conference, it was 4 days talking about interstellar space exploration. It's going from one solar system, like we have a solar system with our sun and the planets, going to another solar system with another sun and another planet and other planets. That whole conference was dedicated to it. And we brought in 1,000 of the top space science minds, and all of these grown-ups are there talking about a project that takes place 100 years in the future. And at the last day, at the wrap-up, Dave Nayland from DARPA was asking all the people in this big giant ballroom what their impression of the 4 days was. And I'm like, pick me, pick me, pick me. And from the stage, Dave goes, all right, Mike Mongo, it looks like you've got something to say. And it was kind of ridiculous because I was really like, so I stood up and I said, this has been the best conference that I've ever been to in my entire life. And it's the best expenditure of tax money. This is so good because we've inspired people to think about the future and who knows what's going to come from here. But I want to point out that we're talking about a mission that has a mission window of 100 years. And there's not a single student or child in this room. And it was like you could hear a pin drop. It was the effect, it just rippled through the whole audience like, oh, because grown-ups sometimes forget these things. We as grown-ups sometimes forget the most important thing. None of us are going to be alive in 100 years. None of us grown-ups, most likely, almost certainly. But students, there's students that would carry this mission forward.
Right.
And so from that moment right there in 2011, I became the go-to person for pretty much anything to do with students in space.
You know, and the thing about that is, so why do you feel that part is often overlooked? Students and young people in the conversation of space.
I know the answer. I know. Here's why. And I know, and you know the answer too. And a lot of students know the answer, and a lot of grown-ups don't know the answer. And this is weird. But grown-ups, we as grown-ups often forget what it's like to be a kid.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind. Like, what's the whole point of being here? Because it's like fun and creating things and doing adventures and like, or what?
Right.
Like, what's the other choice? Like a boring life where you're not happy?
Well, you know, it's funny that whole idea of having to act like an adult. What does that mean? You know, taking all the fun out of life, all the adventure, all of the mystery, all of the investigation.
Yeah, the curiosity.
Right. And
yeah, the imagination.
We get so wrapped up in, well, how are people going to perceive me as not being professional or not being, you know, yes, exactly, taken seriously, all of those things.
I've had like, okay, so like we as grown-ups, we all know these people that take themselves so seriously, so they can't. So if we're having fun, if we're being silly, or we've come up with an idea that is revolutionary, they don't want to know about it. and like I've had people just shut me down because of the glasses.
Yes.
That's actually helpful though, because I know who they are and where they're coming from then.
What's interesting about that too is the ones that instead of being turned off and turn away, they are gravitate to you and say, hey like man, what's up? What's going on with that? We need to talk, you know?
Yeah. So I'll be going through in the before the quarantine, before all of this stuff, before the pandemic, in the before when I was going through airports, this happened all the time. So I would go through an airport and then people would just be doing what they're doing and they would look up and then they would like do their thing. Or they would be, some people would see me and they would make like an angry face, which always tickles me, all right? And then there was these people, then there was this other group and they would walk up to me, like in the middle of never seen me before in their life, in the middle of an airport, and they would whisper, hey, your glasses are upside down. And I was, like, that's one of my favorite. My favorite though, is I'll be in an airport and I would walk through the airport and there'd be somebody doing something and they would look up and see my glasses and they would just smile. Every single one of those people that has ever done that, I've introduced myself to.
Oh, that's such a great story. I love that. And so take me to the book and writing and describing the book that you came out with, which has impacted and, you know, changed students' lives.
So the book is the Astronaut Instruction Manual. The Astronaut Instruction Manual it was the book that I needed when I was the student. I needed this book. And so I wrote it for me, then him or her. And I wanted students to know they had permission, that students have permission to imagine themselves living, working, and playing in space. And then how to support that vision, surrounding ourselves with allies. Allies is such an important word. People who believe in our dreams, and distancing ourselves from people who don't believe in our dreams. And that could be friends, that could be grown-ups. I mean, like, there's plenty of people who, when I started as an astronaut teacher, thought that it was the silliest, most ridiculous idea in the world. How can you be an astronaut teacher? You've never been to space. How can you be, you've never been an astronaut? Well, there's astronaut teachers and there's astronaut trainers. Like you doing NASA training have worked with plenty of astronaut trainers. And those are people who work with people who are astronauts or who are going into space. I work with people before they get to that place. And so a number of the people that I've worked with originally, I think you know Andy Hatch. I think that you've met him. And they're training to be astronauts now. Like they were kids, they were 8-year-olds, and now they're 20-something-year-olds, and they are astronauts. They're training to be astronauts.
I love that. And this whole idea of live, work, and play in space.
Yeah.
And inspiring that vision in people. And what's neat is that you connect with people all over the world. And so what I want to talk about is the impact, because there's two things that some people might not know is that about the Astronaut Job Fair. And so I'm just thinking progression-wise, you came out with the book and then you went and started the Astronaut Job Fair. So tell us a little bit about that.
So Astronaut Job Fair and you got to be part of Astronaut Job Fair. I was so honored because you were the astronaut for our Astronaut Job Fair, and to go to cities and put on a day-long event where students come in of different age groups and get to interact with space science professionals and then get the tools necessary for them to go on and pursue the dream of living, working, and playing in space. Like, that's the whole point of Astronaut Job Fair, is to give them tools and give them, I like to say this, a critical competitive advantage. So, because there's, like, for instance, there's 1.5 million sixth graders in the US, okay? So if we give a group of 100 students on one day some extra tools to be able to pursue their dreams of becoming space explorers or space professionals or astronauts, well, they have an advantage over what group of 100 students has a critical competitive advantage over all of the other 1.5 million sixth graders. And there's another 1.5 million seventh graders and 1.5 million eighth graders. It goes on and on and on. And even young students that know some of this stuff have an advantage over grown-ups who don't. So that's what we did when we put on Astronaut Job Fair. And the other thing about this is that I don't work with just students in the US. I work with students in Haiti. I work with students in Mexico. I work with students in Colombia, South America. I work with students in Canada. I work with a lot of students in India. I just started work with a student in Cameroon, Africa. He's 23, but he doesn't have the advantages that everybody has. And like, if you're born in the US, you automatically have advantages just by being lucky. There's no reason that you were born in the US and somebody else was born in Africa. So it's our job to make it fair for everybody.
Right.
And so I give extra advantages for people who are in other countries that don't have a NASA.
Right.
Cameroon has no NASA.
I love that, when we're talking about opportunities, equity, and, the birth lottery. And whether you're lucky to be born with good parents and in a country that enables you and provides possibility and resources to achieve your dream.
Yeah.
Versus those that aren't, did not win the birth lottery, and what we can do to even the playing field. And I think that's so important, Mike. Everything, talking to you about all of this, and we haven't even gotten to some of even what you're doing now. But I want to bring in a little bit of food. We talked about coffee, but I want to talk about exploration. And you wanted to be an astronaut as a kid. Where in the solar system, if you could go, Where would you want to go, Mike, and why?
All right. So I'm okay. The moon. No question. No question. Absolutely no question. I'm not really interested in the other place besides the moon. I do like some of the moons of Jupiter. They are cool. But I'm a heat kind of person. So I really like warmth. And I'm also a big fan of Earth in a major way. I'm such a fan of this planet. This planet is so awesome. It's, again, perfect example of happening to have been born somewhere and taking it for granted.
Right.
As a space scientist, I do not take Earth for granted. The variables necessary for Earth to be the planet it is, just the Van Allen belt, the crazy radiation magnetosphere that is around the planet that prevents cosmic storms from coming in and just baking us. It's amazing. All the variables.
Is. So can you imagine yourself one day having this experience right here? I'll put up a picture.
Oh, wow. So that's Earthrise. I would cry and cry and cry. My tears would be flowing off my face. Like there's a little bit of gravity on the moon, so they probably just you're not supposed to cry when you're doing astronaut.
Yeah, I know, right? In your space, and you're like, damn it, I can't
not
my eyes.
Yeah, it's true.
But I'm a moon girl also, and so looking at this picture and the thought of seeing that perspective of our beautiful planet. I can't imagine anything more spectacular in my life than being, and I feel so fortunate to be able to look at a photo of this, but to experience it in real time.
If I even think about it too much, I get choked up because of imagining being in that position as that astronaut. And I think that was Ed. I always confuse it with Frank White because Frank White wrote the overview effect. But,
that's correct.
But the person who took that, I think, was Ed. Hold on. Let's find this out. This is important.
Yeah, because we can always Google that.
Yeah. It's called the Earthrise photo.
It is.
Yeah, and it's really one of the most famous photographs ever taken. And Bill Anders.
Bill Anders. I met Bill Anders, actually.
I believe it.
And I met him and his kids when I was flying a lot with my pilot's license. Just such a great guy. And his kids, oh man, we had so much fun. They had some historic, like World War II planes. And this one, I wish I could remember the name of it, but I got a beautiful picture of it. And just, I love going to air shows for that reason, because that's always
our friend Christopher Washington took me to an air museum when I was in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, really?
I was in Urbana, and they have one in Urbana, and they have a fab lab there, and they let students build a World War II airplane, rebuild it.
That is fantastic. One of the things I love is hands-on learning, where you're just like, hey, let's solve this problem, like a real problem in the world, or let's build something. I think that brings something to the learning experience. Who would you want to share Earthrise with? If you could bring one person with you to the moon, who would it be and why?
My son, Raphael.
Oh, I love that. Talk to me about kids in space and your thoughts on that. It's
the best idea in the entire world. I mean, having kids go to space, we've been going, there's something I like to share with people, and that is about when I was talking to classrooms about kids going to space years ago, I would always say, we've been going to space for almost 60 years, and we've never had a kid go to space. And I preface it with, I got to tell you a secret. No one has ever told you. No grown-up has ever told you. And I tell them, there's never been a kid in space. And it blows their minds. It's like they're like, oh my God, the conspiracy is real. Like I knew they were working against us. I know it. But I said I don't give a problem without giving an opportunity for a solution, and that is that some student in this classroom might be the first kid in space. Like I'm working with Alyssa Carson right now. You know Alyssa, and so then she is. You guys both did Project Possum.
That's correct.
You're the famous astronaut who did Project Possum. Yes, that's you. And so, yeah, she's a teenager, and she just turned 19 in March. So this last year, right now, if she gets to space, she'll be the first teenager in space.
Right.
Ever. And that's a big deal because we have never had a person who's under 20 go to space. I think the youngest astronaut is 25. I could be wrong. I think that there's another one from another country. I was thinking U.S., but it may be the youngest astronaut is 25.
Right.
So that's ridiculous. When we first started putting people up into airplanes in 1908 with the Wright brothers, and the very first public show of an airplane, we had an 11-year-old, Andreas Constantinople. I have to look up his last name. I did the research. I found it out. I actually had someone in France look it up from the records because we keep these kind of records. And 3 weeks before that public flight of the very first airplane, we had the very first casualty. I mean, someone died in an airplane crash because we had just invented the technology. 3 weeks after someone died in an airplane, we put a kid in an airplane. So you cannot tell me that 60 years after we've been sending human beings to space that we can't send kids to space.
Right.
That's the first part.
Mm-hmm.
Second part is that why aren't kids in space? Kids want to go to space. Kids are going to enjoy it more than us. I know that my inner 10-year-old and your inner 10-year-old, that our kids are well and healthy and with us. And nonetheless, there is something genuine and wonderful about can you imagine being 12 and in space? Come on.
Right.
And then not just some kid whose parents are overly wealthy and they have that advantage. That's not the kids that I'm working with, mostly. There's always a couple. But the kids who are doing the work, like Alyssa Carson has done the work. She's 19 and she speaks 4 languages fluently. She sold cakes to make money to go to space camp. She did scouts. She does her homework. She's respectful and kind to people, generous and personality. These are the things that I tell students. The simplest thing in the entire world is not to yell at your mom.
Yeah. Simplest
thing. Yes, it's frustrating. Deal with those emotions. Look for another opportunity. Last night, my son, Raphael, I'm reading him Jules Verne, Mysterious Island before he bed, and he lives in Key West and I'm in Los Angeles. And so I'm having this conversation with him, and I'm like, we're doing FaceTime, and I said, did you brush your teeth? And he's like, yeah. Like, are you eating something? He's like, yeah, I'm eating a peanut butter sandwich. I said, you're eating a peanut butter sandwich in bed? First of all, before bed, and then after you brush your teeth, like what? And he got so upset. So his mom came in the room. We walked him through it, got to the place where he got to finish his sandwich, which was never off the table. He had decided on his own.
Yes.
And so being a kid and having supportive grown-ups around us and letting them take the lead and trusting the people who love you and support and who believe in you, and not arguing when someone says, take out the garbage, because those are all tests. You and I both know this. Grown-ups test us to see which ones get to go forward. So if we're cool, if we're kind, if we're polite, they move us forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. You know, Mike, it's already well past our time, and I could talk to you for hours, as you know. I want to say a couple of people who have tuned in. Lisa Young, who you met at Yuri's Night, and Aaron Bonilla.
Hey, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron. Hi, Lisa. And then we have Cam Habler. And thank you for those of you that have joined in. Mike, I know that you've got a new show, and how can people watch, tune in, connect with you?
So it's Mike Mongo's Astronaut Adventures. It's a wonderful series. It's great for students. I got to say about the students, the last thing about sending kids to space is that it would inspire all the other students in the world. And then by inspiring all the other students, it would create what Loretta Whiteside's called space kind. We would turn humankind into space kind.
Yes.
And that's the idea here. And that's what I talk about in Astronaut Adventures. And I give students the tools necessary to succeed in this dream that you and I both share and that they have about going and living, working, playing in space, doing whatever thing you want to do on Earth in space.
Oh, I love that. It's such a great message. Mike, thank you again for coming on Space Snacks. And for those of you that are listening, one of you will win a recipe postcard for tuning in and leaving a comment in Space Snacks. And so thank you for everything.
Thanks,
Mike, thanks. You're my brother. I love you.
Love you. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.